Welcome to today's American Community Media Weekly National Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, American Community Media's Associate Editor and your moderator for today. As Latinos face rising discrimination with even citizens targeted by masked agents and deportations, Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny has emerged as a voice of cultural resistance. Through his music and pride in Puerto Rican identity, he has uplifted his island and community, inspiring and benefiting the island's economy during a recent 30-day residency there. Out of concern for ICE targeting, he left the U.S. off his last world tour, yet next year he'll take the biggest American stage, the Super Bowl halftime show. And he's challenged audiences to learn Spanish by then. While other Latin artists like Peso Pluma, Becky G, Don Omar, Ivan Cornejo, and Nessa, and many others support immigrant causes, Bad Bunny is considered by many to be the biggest music star in the world, and he has a global platform. His willingness to use it makes him a defining figure in this moment. We ask reporters to enter questions in the chat, and we will address as many as we can during the event. Our panelists are Julio Ricardo Varela, editor of the Latino newsletter. Antonio Mejias Rentas is a veteran entertainment journalist, formerly of La Opinión and Boyle Heights Beat editor. And Frances Negron Muntaner, award-winning filmmaker, writer, and scholar, professor at Columbia University, author of Boricua Pop, Puerto Ricans, and the Latinization of American Culture, among many other books. So let's go right in, guys. This question is for all of you. Whoever wants to jump. Bad Bunny has been called the biggest music star in the world, yet he centers Puerto Rico, sings in Spanish, and doesn't tailor his art to the U.S. mainstream. What does that say about where the Latino identity stands today in the middle of a rising climate of discrimination and crisis?
Well, in the past, I think that for Latino art, Latino artists have been successful in the U.S. for about a century, maybe more. And during the 80s and 90s, we saw the phenomenon called a crossover, which is a way that Latino artists, the way to success in achieving mainstream support was by recording in English. And so we saw a bunch of artists having bilingual or English language records. And that is obviously not necessary anymore. And but Bad Bunny is not the first or only artist to record only in Spanish. In fact, most of the artists in that genre, in trap and reggaeton, their music has always been recorded in Spanish. But I think in the case of Bad Bunny, given today's political climate, we're looking at the use of Spanish as a tool of resistance, which it very well may be. Speaking Spanish, after all, is one of the ways that the Supreme Court has said that it's okay for ICE agents to identify the undocumented by their use of language. So at that level, using Spanish by residents is now seen as a form of resistance. But again, Bad Bunny is not the first artist to do that, and many artists have done that throughout their career. I can think of Rubén Blades, never recorded in Spanish. Residente has never recorded in Spanish. So, the fact that Bad Bunny is so successful, has achieved so much in his career, in his short career, makes it more apparent. But it's not different. It's just more obvious.
It's very packed. Your question has a lot of layers. We can go at it in different ways. I concur that we should see Bad Bunny's success as part of a long history. I see a lot of coverage that singles him out as unique or a genius or this type of framing. I think that's not that helpful to understanding why we are in this juncture. And some of the threads that I would open up for reporting would be the role demographic changes in the U.S. That correlate with young people. So there's a proportionally speaking, there's a lot of young people and young people drive the market for advertisers. We should also look at that Latino diaspora. Right now, I'm in Madrid, and a third of the population of Madrid is foreign-born, and a big portion of that are people from Latin America. In fact, I go to work a few times a week to a neighborhood where it's a huge mural of Karol G. So Bad Bunny can project himself globally in part because there are demographic changes in the U.S., which beams it out, but also because there are migrations of Spanish speakers elsewhere in the world, and also because of shifts in technology are very important. If we compare the salsa stars of the 70s, the conditions that they worked in with the conditions Bad Bunny is working with, there's so many differences. One is the ability of an artist to communicate with an audience without that much intermediation. There is mediation. But consider, for instance, that Calle 13 dropped their first hit directly to the audience through the internet. Those were things that were not available to salseros. They can keep more of their money. They have become a lot more savvy, so they amass a certain type of economic power, and as a brand, they have more agency than prior generations. So if we put all those together and relate them, we can start seeing how is it possible that out of that long history of struggle to get heard and to have more say and agency of what you're offering, someone like Bad Bunny emerged. And then I guess the other thread I would say is that it seems to me that the cultural capitals are shifting. There was a period where there's like Hollywood or there's New York. I mean, there's these places where they're correlated and are co-equated with the maximum cultural production in the world. But that's clearly changing. You can have a superstar coming out of any number of places right now. And Puerto Rico, people ask, why Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is a colony. It doesn't have as many millions of people as other places. Its infrastructure is also not as developed as other places. Yet it sits culturally, and when we get to that, it sits culturally at the crossroads of things. So not only do you have a long history of Caribbean music that people can draw from, but you also have a group of people that are exposed to the world in a particular way that makes it very current to the moment. And later we can talk a little bit about why a song in Spanish about belonging can resonate in countries where no one speaks Spanish.
Yeah. First of all, just repping, that's my uniform. I wear it pretty much every day up here. I'm in the Boston area, but like Francis, fellow Boricua. None of this surprises me. And I think to what Antonio and Francis have both said, in terms of this sort of quest for representation and being part of this fabric, whatever the quote unquote mainstream is, there's been a path, right? And we have to recognize those that came before us. I love the fact that Francis talked about, the salseros of the 70s. I mean, Fania All-Stars, right? Playing in Zaire, this is nothing new, right? I think, but this is where I want to step back because, and there's plenty of people, and I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists or you, Pilar, but we all saw this coming in a good way, right? Antonio mentions the 80s and the 90s. I'm a Gen X kid. We were talking about the Latin, takeover of American culture when Ricky Martin got on stage at the Grammys during the World Cup and just kind of, best live performance in Grammy history. And, I can tell you why, right? And we're more than happy to debate that. So Bad Bunny is taking advantage of the moment. All these predictions of U.S. Latinos finally becoming a powerful number. Also, this notion of Puerto Rico always being part of the cultural landscape. All these factors are coming together, and now you have this there's no other way to say it. This genius artist who probably started with music that none of the people, I'm from the older generation, and early Bad Bunny, it took me a while, and I'm a punk rocker, right? Now it's like, my tias are like, hey, did you listen to the new Bad Bunny album? And you're like, what? So there's something deeper here that he is so savvy and so smart to understand the moment and his presence in the moment. And what we're witnessing is nothing different than, say, Prince or Michael Jackson or James Brown or Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra, like all these moments in sort of global pop culture, like the Beatles. This is the moment. And Bad Bunny has become that moment. And the reason why it's so deep, it's because the reaction against him has been so strong. So I love, pop culture defines global culture. And we are like everything that we've worked for, whether as a journalist or anyone here in my 30 years of doing this, like I'm really excited because all these issues that we've talked about are finally coming to the mainstream. So
great. Thank you, Francis, Antonio, Julio. I saw you going like this, guys. Do you have anything to say back to?
I completely agree with Francis's take on the fact that it's today's the way that the music industry has developed, has worked to the benefit of artists like today's artists like Bad Bunny. I mean, I want to fantasize about what Hector Lavoe would have been to the world had he had social media, digital technology, etc. To today. So yeah, that's why I was nothing. I was thinking about the salsa phenomenon the whole time.
I'd like to say something about, I'm writing about Buddy. I haven't published anything, but I'm already writing. And one of the things that I note is that Bad Bunny has had a bit of an arc. We haven't had the same Bad Bunny all the time.
Yes.
We should have at least 3 Bad Bunnies. And I would say it's, and I think we will talk a bit about this a little later, it's the cultural nationalist Bad Bunny that's been able to amplify how many people feel in Puerto Rico that happens to be like how many people feel in other parts of the world, because some of these tensions are happening in various parts. For instance, when Bad Bunny talks about mass tourism, talks about the cost of living, or he talks about, I don't want to be expelled from my neighborhood because this is happening, neoliberal capital is taking over the entire housing stock for, derivatives and what have you. When he's talking about those processes, forced migration or the feeling of forced migration is actually resonating worldwide, because these transformations and these struggles are happening in many parts of the world. And I'm not sure if it's something he's masterminded, to the T, but kind of a dialogue that has been happening between what he's offering, how people respond, and in a kind of a learning process, dialogic a bit. At least when you look at his trajectory closely, you see that there's been un tanteo too. So, for instance, one of the things that the right is really upset about, and I see it all over social media, is that he wore a dress for a photo shoot. And we don't want these things for children to see them. But that's not the Bad Bunny of the residency.
Right.
In fact, Bad Bunny of the residency is very traditional Puerto Rican masculinity.
Yep.
And then I guess the other thing I wanted to say, there is a scholar called Brian Herrera who has a great book about the ways that Latino performers in American cultural history come in and out as it was cyclical. So the cycle goes, there's a huge artist, everybody's excited about it, then that artist eventually becomes a parody, and then everybody forgets Latino artists exist until the next cycle. So one of the questions that I have is whether these transformations that we're talking about that are technological, economic, politically, the fact that there's multiple focus of culture, that there's less hegemony of certain places, means that Latin numbers is over. That in fact, Bad Bunny represents a shift that's structural. That I'm not sure yet.
Yes.
Which is funny because
I will be 100% sure with that, Francis, that we have passed that corner. And I will double down on that until I stop writing or stop producing or stop whatever I'm doing on the journalism front. Everything, at least from my career and what I've seen in terms of representation and fighting for it and saying like, this is something for the next wave. Like when I would say like 69 million in when I was in 1990 as a young editor and being like, there'll be 70 million Latinos in 2030. People would be like, that is 40 years away. We are here. And everything that we've predicted has happened. So that when you mention the demographics, that Bad Bunny is a product of where we are at. And the last thing I'll say before there's other questions, Pilar, is that, and what is incredibly just, what I love about it is that you can be deeply Puerto Rican and also be a strong ally to Latino communities and actually be both. Because one of the things that's fascinating me about this entire story is that there's so many think pieces about like, he's representing U.S. Latino communities. And you're like, whoa, but have you seen what he said about Puerto Rico? Have you seen what about the colonial relationship? Like, let's not make all these conclusions where it's like, well, he's an American like us. It's like, you haven't seen the residency. So that complexity to be able to live in all those worlds and still see this elevation, and then finally to get to the pinnacle of American pop culture capitalism in the Super Bowl. Like, you're going to be in the Super Bowl. Like, that's, I can go all day. So.
Okay. There's an interesting question here. I'm going to pick it up from all the questions in the chat by Frank Blanquette. He says, one thing that stands out to me is the fact that you have U.S. citizens having to defend themselves essentially for not looking white, being detained for not looking white, being fined for not having documents on hand that prove citizenship or legal status. This holds true for Bad Bunny's community members, Puerto Ricans who are U.S. citizens at birth, and it's insane to me that a lot of the country does not understand that or chooses not to, but also Native American tribal citizens who also look non-white and whose first language, though less common, might not be English as well. This is almost a separate issue from the injustices being felt by our migrant and immigrant communities, Latinos and others, specifically those affected by racial profiling, but also allies. And can such unification realistically lead to change?
First of all, I don't think Americans understand Puerto Rico. Let's just start there. And we're U.S. citizens, but we're not. And, the history of discrimination that we have experienced through forced migration, through bad policies that led us to, all over parts of the country, cheap labor that was needed. I don't want to get too deep into the history, but those are commonalities. Like you can apply that to pretty much any immigrant Latin American community. So there is a sense of solidarity. I think the problem with this type of conversation in the grand American mainstream is that I don't see a lot of Puerto Rican voices at the table. I don't need Fox News to debate about Bad Bunny if there's no Puerto Ricans at the table. And I know Rachel Duffy Campos might be one, but I'm just saying it's like, I don't need two white dudes talking about Puerto Rico and Bad Bunny when you have no clue about Puerto Rico in the first place, right? So there's always been this, we don't belong feeling. And if you really want to get deep into like what Puerto Rico is, I would recommend people looking at like Supreme Court cases that literally say that we belong to we're not part of the United States. We belong, like we're property of the United States. We're a territory of the United States. Like that is language that is also used to describe, other ugly parts of American history. So I refuse to let American media dictate the Puerto Rico issue because they don't understand it and they never have, right? So the benefit of Bad Bunny now dominating culture is that Puerto Ricans or whoever can come in and be like, okay, you like your Bad Bunny? And like, now we're going to break it down. Because these are the 20 things that you've missed, and you've totally not understood us at all as a people or as our relationship with the United States. I live in liberal Boston. I have tons of American liberal friends who just like, well, Puerto Ricans are American citizens. I'm like, yeah, it's so much more complicated than that. And like, you really, really need to know our history. And, and I'm done with the simplistic takes on mainstream journalism. So I urge my fellow journalist colleagues, it's like, let's get beyond Bad Bunny takes and let's get into the issue of what Puerto Rico, what's going on. And especially now, since the hurricane, we've had this interest, but everyone's interested in us when bad things happen to us. But there's so many deeper stories, so many relevant stories. And I will remind people that we are the second largest Latino population in the United States. So we're living all over this country. You have 3 people like Antonio's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. It's this is reality. The diaspora is here. Puerto Ricans are here in this country. And we're still being I'm still trying to defend West Side Story stereotypes from the 50s.
One of the important things about reporting about Puerto Rico is understanding the fact that most Puerto Ricans live in the continental United States. There's a larger population of Puerto Ricans in the 50 states than there is in the island or the archipelago, as some of us want to call it. Every time I hear one of our liberal friends or even the liberal media defend Puerto Rico with the concept that these are Puerto Rican citizens, Puerto Ricans are born U.S. citizens, I cringe because media should really be saying Puerto Ricans are citizens because they were imposed a citizenship by invasion. I mean, this invasion took place in 1898. It was about 150 years ago. And, most people don't even know that this happened. So right from the bat, understanding how we became citizens is important to the discussion. The advocates of Puerto Rican independence say, I talked to some of them, told me that they think it's really important for American citizens to understand that Puerto Rico is really a colony of the United States, that's the status. That's what we should be saying. And understand that what's happening in Puerto Rico is basically due to this colonial status, and clarifying that would help a lot. Bad Bunny never identifies himself as anything but Puerto Rican. No need to say that he's an American citizen. That's not part of his narrative.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought that up. One thing I want to say that, Julio, I wrote something about how the awareness about Puerto Rico have actually increased dramatically since Hurricane Maria. Actually, there were surveys done that most Americans did not know Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens until that. And that was actually partly an effect of how the press covered Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. But there's 2 kind of fine print here. One of it, that the interest in covering Puerto Rico was not really covering Puerto Rico, but criticizing the president, which Trump at the time. So therefore, the depth was limited. And the second thing that I look in there, it has to do with what Antonio was saying, is that in order to help, I think most journalists wanted to help that aid would come in, that people would not suffer unnecessarily and the like. they use the strategy of calling Puerto Ricans American citizens. And the thinking behind that is, if we tell Americans, and this is actually studied, if you tell Americans that somebody's an American citizen, the assumption is they're going to care more. They're going to identify more and the like. The problem is that nationality and citizenship is different for millions of people in the world, not only Puerto Ricans. So I think part of what coverage can do is break that down. That U.S. citizenship is a legal relation that is the product of the colonial history that has been mentioned, while the nationality of Puerto Ricans is the product of imagining ourselves as part of a national community, whether we have a state or not. I mean, and that's where culture, which is the main theme of this conversation, is so important. Most ethno-national groups in the world do not have their own states. Actually, and they're so therefore there's nation states that have multiple national groups within. And that has something to do with the question or the comment on Native Americans in the United States or indigenous people in various parts of the world. So I think part of the work that can be done is how is it that culture plays a role in a group imagining themselves as cohesive, as a nation, as an ethnic group, or as a group with a shared past, a present, and a desire for a shared future. And that's one thing that I would really accentuate, that in order to say that Bad Bunny could or can or should have an opportunity to play at the Super Bowl, it's not necessary to say he's an American citizen. It's more helpful to contextualize how is it that a figure like Bad Bunny is able to have that opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.